Everyone knows France for its luxury goods, gourmet cuisine, sophisticated lifestyle, and excellent healthcare system. But what if I told you that France is actually a budget-conscious person's paradise? Behind the luxury hotels and fashion brands is a country where everyday living actually embraces frugality without compromising a very pleasant lifestyle. Today, I'll be sharing observations I've made about how French culture naturally encourages frugality, which may change the way you see this country. I'm Susie, I'm American, and I've been living here in Dijon, France since 2008. My husband of nearly 17 years is French, which has given me a front row seat to observe the culture for nearly 2 decades. You might be surprised to discover a pretty typical French lifestyle is accessible on a relatively modest budget. And rest assured, if you're frugal yourself, you won't be seen as stingy or out of place. You'll simply be living like many French people do every day. This is something I've reflected on deeply, partly because I'm quite focused on managing my family's money effectively, but also because as a foreigner, I notice differences between my home culture and what I observe here. At first glance, French salaries are significantly lower than average American salaries, but that comparison may be overly simplistic, which I'll come back to later. Logically, lower salaries mean less spending power, but here's the paradox. Despite earning less, many French people still enjoy a remarkably high quality of life. Personally, I don't think that the lower salaries here actually translate to lower living standards. Some of this is systemic. The quality of the healthcare system and affordable, very often free higher education mean people can dedicate more disposable income to other aspects of life. But it's not just about the overall economic system. There are many personal behavioral choices and cultural norms that contribute as well. So what are some concrete ways this frugality manifests? I'm going to walk you through examples I've noticed in my everyday life. Things that are pretty common in my little microcosm anyway. Maybe these are things that you already do or could come to embrace over time. So let's get into it.
Here are some of the differences I've noticed when it comes to expenses that often take up a large chunk of people's budgets. First, transportation choices. Personally, I have a tiny little micro car, which we bought for 3,000 euros 7 years ago, and it costs very little to operate, 20 euros a month for insurance, for example. I think a lot of people buy used cars for cash here. I do see a lot of newer looking cars on the road, but I assume that the operating costs are less than in the US, which is crucial because gas prices are relatively high here. And while we do see more hybrids and electric vehicles on the road, they are still definitely in the minority here. But most of the time, I don't opt to drive. I prefer to take my bike to get around Dijon on a daily basis, which is definitely a frugal choice comparatively. And it also has environmental and even health benefits. I can make this choice because the bike infrastructure where I live, although not always perfect, is good enough for me to feel like biking is a safe and viable option. But for people who don't want to or can't drive or ride their bikes, public transportation is a viable option here in Dijon as well, largely because of the affordability. A 1 hour pass on the public transportation system here is just €1.40. I should mention, however, that train rides for longer distances are often quite expensive. I find that tickets can be prohibitively expensive sometimes, which is really too bad because trains are such an environmentally friendly way to get around the country and also just really pleasant. So I wish that train tickets were more affordable sometimes. Next, housing, which is often people's largest monthly expense. Well, ours is still relatively affordable here. Granted, we bought our house almost 12 years ago, but our mortgage is only about 1,100 euros a month and will be paid off in about 6 years. And you can rent a decent furnished 2-bedroom apartment today for about that much here in Dijon. And while detached single-family houses relatively close to downtown like ours are pretty rare and therefore quite expensive now, you could buy a very nice 2-bedroom apartment for probably about 200,000 euros here in Dijon. According to the website Meilleur Agent, the average price per square meter for an apartment in Dijon is about 2,400 euros, which gives you an idea of how much you can expect to pay for an apartment here. And of course, real estate prices differ drastically depending on the region that you're looking at in France, but Dijon is an example of a small city where housing is still relatively affordable and where homeownership is still within reach, I think, for most people with modest middle-class salaries. It's not the case all over France, but it is still the case here in Dijon for the moment. And in terms of energy consciousness, I think people are very aware of how much utilities cost here, probably because electricity, water, gas, and heating oil are also comparatively expensive here as well. For example, when it comes to our family's utilities, my husband obsessively tracks our water consumption and electricity use. It's an effort to keep the utility costs down, but there's also the environmental benefit as well. And his efforts have actually really paid off. In fact, our electricity bill went down by almost 800 euros last year because my husband switched our household electricity plan to a special program called Tempo. And so the system requires us to be extremely conscious of our electricity use, especially on the 22 red days per year, because on those days, electricity costs 3 times as much as normal. So on those days, we program dishwashing and clothes washing and drying for the middle of the night when electricity is at least affordable. And then there are 43 days a year that are sort of in between. Those are the white days, and electricity is relatively affordable, but we still make an effort to use most of the electricity that we need at night on those days as well. And then the rest of the year, the days are blue, and the electricity is more affordable on those days. And so this is where we were able to realize the savings that we made over time. And yeah, like I said, we saved 800 euros on our electricity bill last year by opting into this system. And for water consumption, we have flow restrictors on all of our faucets, which has also made a big difference over time as well without really compromising water pressure. And in France, it's pretty common for people just not to have a clothes dryer at all and just to use clothes drying racks for all of their clothes drying needs, which is both a frugal and an environmentally friendly choice. In fact, I found this information online which says that only 35% of French households even have a dryer compared to 80% of American households. We actually have 2 dryers, one in our basement and one in our short-term rental behind our house, but they're both heat pump dryers, and so they consume less energy than conventional dryers. And we definitely need a dryer with the amount of laundry that we have to do to operate our short-term rental. We didn't actually even get our dryer until our second son was born. So, for the first 4.5 years of my older son's life, all of his laundry was air dried. But I think by the time my second son came around, we thought, okay, let's just get a dryer. We'll make our lives easier with 2 kids. And finally, the last category of sort of everyday spending, where I've noticed people are often also very frugal, is in terms of clothing. Secondhand shopping seems to have become much more common here. For me in particular, I should add. In other videos, I've talked about how I use the online platform Vinted to buy gently used high quality clothes quite frequently, and how vintage and charity secondhand clothing shops seem to be proliferating here in Dijon. So there are definitely a lot of us shopping like this these days. Again, this might say more about my socioeconomic and geographic location than anything else, because of course those famous French luxury brands exist and definitely have plenty of clients here in France and abroad. But that type of luxury consumption is just, I don't know, just not really on my radar. Plus, I think that our family's wardrobes are relatively modest, not only in how much we pay for clothing, but also in terms of the quantity that we have. And I think that we're pretty typical in this respect as well. For us, this may also be in part due to the fact that here in our little old house, we don't actually have any closets in the bedrooms. So I think that inevitably keeps the amount of clothes that we accumulate and that we can stock in our rooms relatively low. But I don't think it's just us. I also found this report online, and what I read about how people here in France are changing their clothes buying habits does ring true to me in general as well. My impression is that most French consumers are thoughtful and price conscious when it comes to buying their clothes. The next category I wanted to talk about was socializing and holiday celebrations. In terms of holidays and socializing, I think the French way of celebrating is inherently cost efficient as well. Again, this may be very specific to my French family, but during Christmas, for example, we don't exchange gifts among adults, but there is still lots of celebrating happening. Long, delicious, festive meals in our modestly decorated homes, but the city itself is really decked out during the holidays, which definitely adds to the atmosphere of holiday cheer at the end of the year. And in terms of decorating for the holidays here at home, we actually just have this little artificial tree that we've had now for about 12 years, I think. And at first, I kind of felt like I was depriving my kids of that American tradition of having the big, beautiful Christmas tree, fresh smelling pine scent in the living room at the holidays. But our little tree is actually really quick to decorate, doesn't lose its needles, and having bought an artificial tree, I feel a kind of moral obligation to use it for as long as we possibly can. And over time, also, I've realized that it's kind of become our family tradition to have this little tree and to bring it out every year. And also, it brings back memories of when my older son, was just so tiny, and the tree looked big sitting next to him. And he's bigger than I am, and the tree looks ridiculously small. But it's our family tradition now, so it's okay. And kids' birthday parties are also something that's a relatively modest affair here. Usually, kids will invite a small group of their friends over to their houses, and they'll share an activity. If a parent is really creative, they'll organize a game or something like that for the kids, and they'll have cake and candy. In the past, what we've done is we've had our kids invite a group of friends to a laser tag center or a trampoline park, and we'll just have the soda and the cake that the trampoline park, for example, will provide. And I don't even bother to provide favors. Some parents do, which is sweet, but I figure we're paying for the kids to enjoy the experience of the trampoline park, for example, and that's quite enough. And in terms of socializing with other adults, we usually do that at each other's houses. So, for example, this Saturday we had family over for a long, lingering, extended dinner that lasted hours and hours, which is great because it really means that you get to hang out with the people and spend quality time with them. And for example, last Friday we were invited over to a friend's house for dinner, and it was the same itinerary. And I don't necessarily think that this is only done for budgetary reasons, but I do think that it is less expensive than going out to eat. I think people do it so that they can spend more time together, and it is really nice. I mean, we do go out to eat sometimes, and we will meet up with friends, for example, for a drink or something downtown, but it's just not as common. I think that we definitely spend more time socializing with people at home or with them in their homes. And so I've noticed over time that the focus is not on the grandeur necessarily. When we're socializing here in France and celebrating the holidays, the focus is really on two basic things: eating delicious food and spending as much time as possible with our loved ones. And I think it's really great. Next, I wanted to talk about this ideal of resourcefulness. The French call it Système D. It's this idea of making do with what you have, of fixing things, maintaining them, and trying to do things yourself. And because my husband is a proponent of this system, I'm sure that we've saved a lot of money over the years. My husband is very handy, or bricoleur, as they say in French, and so he knows how to fix a lot of things. And when he doesn't, he'll do research on how to figure it out because I think he enjoys the challenge and the satisfaction of seeing something come back to life in a sense. So, for example, our television set, which we bought new in 2009, and it was a very expensive purchase at the time, it just kind of stopped working during the pandemic. And instead of just getting rid of it and buying a new TV, my husband did some research online and found out that there was one component in this model of television that often died, whereas the rest of the TV is still perfectly good. You just need to replace this one component. So he ordered it, and it arrived, and he used the dining room table as sort of an operating table, and he transplanted this component into the old TV and basically brought the television back to life, and it's still working today now, and it's 16 years old, which is definitely a point of pride for us, and I think a good example of this ideal of resourcefulness and fixing things when they're broken. So the next level of resourcefulness, the ultimate resourcefulness, is when you can repair your things and get a good deal on the repairs. And I have a perfect example for this as well. My car just needed to have some work done on it. It's an old car. It needs maintenance occasionally, but it needed to have the clutch repaired and the brake pads and the oil changed, which was going to be a lot of money considering that it's kind of an old and pretty cheap car itself. We were struggling to decide whether or not it was worth it to do the work. And when my husband had a brilliant idea, or he concocted this plan with a friend. We have a friend who is a teacher in a vocational high school who agreed to have his students do the work for us, or do the work on the car. Because when you have work done on your car by high school kids, you have to pay for the parts and you have to pay for the labor, but it's nominal amount for the labor. So we had all this work done on my car, and granted, it took 4 months. So you cannot be in a rush if you're going to have your car repairs done by a vocational high school. But we definitely got a good deal on the repairs, and I think overall it was a win-win situation. But the high school where the work on my car was done is about an hour away. So when the car repairs were finished, we had to figure out a way to go and pick up the car. So this is where another example of French resourcefulness comes into play. Have you ever heard of BlaBlaCar? It's an amazing application that you can use if you need to get somewhere. It's basically like a carpool application. So in the example of going to pick up my car, my husband used BlaBlaCar, the application, and looked to see if anybody was driving from Dijon to the town where my car had been repaired. And so he found that there were several people going there last week, and you can look and you can see what kind of car you'd be driving in, and you can see if the driver has good evaluations. It's kind of like Uber, except the people are just driving for their own reasons around France on the weekends or whatever during the week, anytime. And so my husband found a BlaBlaCar. So he took a BlaBlaCar for, I don't know, 10 euros or something like that, basically from Dijon, where we live, to the town where my car had been repaired in order to go pick it up. So just another way to save time and energy and money. So the driver earned 10 euros or something like that to take my husband in his car on a trip that he was going to do anyway. So again, win-win. So we go skiing every year with a group of friends, and skiing itself, of course, is a pretty expensive endeavor. So we try to cut corners where we can. And for example, I always borrow the same pair of ski pants, ski gloves, and ski goggles from my mother-in-law every year. And the kids too, we always try to find someone who can lend us apparel, ski apparel for the kids, because they grow so fast. And it was funny, this year, family friends lent us a jacket for my younger son. And when I was having him try it on, I realized that inside the jacket, there was a name of another little boy, not the name of our friends' kids, but clearly they had already been given or been lent this jacket by yet another family friend of theirs. So I think the underground network of lending ski apparel and equipment is definitely alive and well in France as well. It's funny. And we are quite frequently asking my mother-in-law to mend clothes for us, which she does very generously as well. So that's been great too. And so many people that we know, including my in-laws, grow their own fruits and veggies in the summer as well, which is great because when they have excess tomatoes or zucchini, they'll often offer them to us as well, which is great. And even us here in the city, we're able to grow a tiny little production here in the small amount of space that we have. For example, we have tomatoes and raspberries and herbs, and we even have a little fig tree, and I love it. I brag to my friends about garnishing dips with homegrown cilantro, for example, and I send photos to my mother and my sister of every measly homegrown strawberry that we managed to harvest. I do think that all of these things add up, and I do think it means that in the end we consume less and that we're also able to save a little money as well. And finally, in terms of financial practices, I think that people manage their money differently here. For one, there's much less reliance on consumer credit here. While it seems like there are some French consumers who struggle with crédit à la consommation, I think it's just much less common here than in the US. The French crédit à la consommation are often store cards that are used to buy electronics, for example, and not credit cards the way that they're commonly used in the US. In fact, personally, I don't know anyone here who carries consumer debt like that month to month the way that many Americans do. I found this stat online that said that of Americans who have a credit card, 48% carry debt, and I just don't know anyone that does that here in France. And in terms of savings rates, I found this information online. So for the US, it looked to be about 4.6% as of January 2025. And then if we compare to the data that I found for France, the most recent of which is from 2023, which says, this dark blue line says that savings rates in France were 17% in 2023. So salaries are quite low, but people are able to save a lot. How is that possible? I have one theory that I'll talk about in a minute. But then when we compare savings, just savings, the blue line, to what they call financial savings, which I think is more like investing in financial products, then the rate drops to 6.6%. And I found online that only 24% of French adults invest in any type of financial product whatsoever. And I have some theories about why this is the case, because if they are able to save their money, you would think that they would also be able to invest it. But I think that there is sort of a risk aversion that's really present in the culture on one hand. And then also, I think that people don't necessarily see the necessity to invest for their retirement because they assume that they're going to have full state-sponsored retirement benefits when it comes time for them to retire. Personally, as someone who, first of all, started working here in France at a later age, and someone who wants to retire, potentially retire early, or at least not work full-time until my full retirement age, I have recognized the need to start investing for my retirement, and I do so actively. But as you can see, that's definitely not the case for even the majority of people here in France. And as sort of a conclusion to this video, I wanted to come back to the point that I made earlier about how comparing average salaries is probably overly simplistic, that these just bare numbers don't tell enough of a nuanced story. In researching for this video, I came across this measurement that I hadn't heard of before called PPP, Purchasing Power Parity, which was explained in this article. It says, PPPs provide a standardized metric to assess the relative purchasing power of different economies, adjusting for price level differences. This adjustment is vital because traditional exchange rate-based comparisons often do not accurately reflect the true economic size and purchasing power of different countries. To further understand economic disparities, we can examine how wages compare across countries when accounting for the cost of living. By analyzing PPP-adjusted statistics, we gain a clearer picture of the real value of a paycheck across countries in different income groups. And I found this absolutely fascinating. From what I understand, it's basically saying that when we compare salaries between countries like France and the US, we need to account for the different costs of living and what money can actually buy in each place. So while French salaries might look lower on paper when converted to dollars, their purchasing power could be similar or even better because of the lower costs for essential services like healthcare, education, and transportation, plus the different lifestyle factors that I've been discussing throughout this video. This helps, I think, to explain why people here can maintain a really good quality of life, even while earning incomes that look quite low by American standards. And maybe this is part of the reason why Americans struggle to save as much as French people do as well, because they just have so many more expenses that they have to pay for out of pocket, and costs for the services there are maybe more expensive. So absolutely take everything that I've said in this video with a grain of salt. It's in no way meant to be scientific, and it's all really based on my own experience and my own observations over the years. To me, this ethos, this culture, allows us to live with less pressure to consume and less stress associated with worrying about paying for healthcare and our kids' education, for example, which brings me personally a sort of peace of mind.
The French approach to money isn't about deprivation, it's about prioritizing what truly matters. France offers more than just beautiful landscapes and exquisite cuisine. It offers a blueprint for a satisfying life that doesn't demand endless consumption. The true French luxury isn't found in designer boutiques, it's in savoring the simple pleasures. So what do you think? Do these frugal habits correspond to the image that you have of France? Could you see yourself living like this as well? If you're interested, you can check out some of the other videos in this playlist right here about living abroad. Signing off on this lovely Sunday from the Carrière Bacquin in Dijon. Merci encore et à bientôt!